everyone, welcome. We hope that the session will give us an opportunity to highlight how the Sustainability Leadership Scorecard has contributed to the overall development of the institutions that use it. Hopefully we'll have some discussion around the key features of the scorecard itself and how we use it, and also a little bit about how we map this to the SDGs and enter the THE SDG ranking. So I'm going to first hand us over to Rebecca Forster. She's the Environmental Manager at the University of Lincoln, to just talk to us a little bit about what she's done and how she's used the scorecard up until now. So Rebecca, if you want to introduce yourself and pop your slide.
Yeah. So hello everyone, hopefully you can all hear me and can see the slides that I've just put up there. So just to introduce myself a bit more, so my name is Rebecca Forster, I'm the Environmental Manager here at the University of Lincoln. I've been in this role and just joined higher education sector around a year ago now. So up until a year ago, the idea of ranking systems and scorecards were all fairly new to me. Initially, when I joined Lincoln, I tried out the Life Index, had a bit of a dabble with a couple of other ranking systems and self-assessment tools. And for me, and particularly following the EAUC conference over the summer, when I learned a bit more about the Sustainability Leadership Scorecard, the SLS tool seemed like a natural progression for us in terms of where we were at Lincoln University. So I wanted just to share my experience with the tool to update you on where we are here, and then hopefully following this and when we've heard a bit more from Neal as well, I'm hoping that it'll generate a bit more discussion that'll help us decide where to go next with it. So just to give you a bit more context around where we are here, I probably started filling out the SLS, the scorecard, around about 4 months ago now, and I'd say it took me around 3 months to have the opportunity to gather enough information and in enough depth to be able to fill out our baseline, which you can see there on the right of my screen. So that's where we are currently. I chose SLS really because it was a natural progression, but also I really liked the ability to self-manage the submission, and then the option for external verification if it was needed, but I could just trial it first. And for us, as the majority of sustainability-related projects are currently coordinated by myself and my environment team who sit within the Estates Department at Lincoln University, the scorecard seems like a good way of focusing on specific areas within the institution, and then having that driver to go out and have further conversations with the leads across the university. So things like teaching and learning, procurement. It was a good way of bringing all of that together. So for me, it seemed like, particularly because I was fairly new to the university still, a good excuse to be able to go out and seek out these contacts and say, hello, I've recently started, I'm filling out a scorecard and I really value a conversation with you, and get your take on where we might be in terms of this ranking, the scorecard, and how embedded sustainability is to your area of focus in your role. So I personally coordinated the submission. I'm the only one currently filling out information on the portal. And again, that's something that I might review now we've got to this baseline point. But to actually complete the information, I arranged these meetings and went through each individual section with a lead from within our university. So for example, targeting people like business continuity team. So I focused on the section on risk by contacting someone in the planning department, having a really productive conversation around how sustainability was embedded within business continuity, how it was associated with the risk assessment of the university. And I personally learned a lot about how it was looked. And then since then, we've had some quite productive follow-up conversations around climate adaptation and how elements of risk around climate adaptation can be integrated as well. So I have found that things have snowballed from that first contact, and it's definitely been a benefit for me by using the tool. So from this baseline, which you can see on the right, I then presented the assessment to our Environmental Sustainability Committee, which here is chaired by our Pro-Vice Chancellor and attended by quite a few members of SLT. So I managed to get it kind of raise awareness of it internally, and it was well received, and it prompted a conversation on whether we want to use SLS as our main driver for sustainability progress, which is still to be decided. But I found it was a really good visual representation in terms of where we were. So that was definitely a good thing. So just to cover some of the main benefits that I found for us at Lincoln, I found it to be a fairly intuitive tool, and although I've been the one coordinating our submission centrally, I'd feel fairly confident that anyone from across the university would be able to navigate it and contribute to its completion. So perhaps if we go forward and I open that up, it may be a route we go down. And as I've talked about, it's been a really useful prompt for that internal engagement, having conversations with people I hadn't come across previously. And then the third benefit is the link with the SDGs. So although it is quite a high level link at this stage, particularly the level of detail that I've gone into it so far, it is a useful driver in terms of even just highlighting that link and showing that the SDGs are coming in within ranking systems, self-scoring systems, and just increasing the profile of the SDGs and everything that we're doing around sustainability reporting has definitely been a good thing. Another advantage I found, especially when comparing it to LIFE and other scorecards, the link with ISO systems, EcoCampus, things like Food for Life. So I think previously the link to those has been less clear, but just being able to tick those boxes and then the scorecard automatically updating to reflect progress in those areas has been really beneficial. And then the final benefit I found, and something that I think we can pick up on a bit more from Lincoln's perspective, is this ability to benchmark against other institutions. So I hadn't initially found this map that looks at all the other higher education and further education institutions and who's been using the scorecard. So you can click onto any one of these and up pops their baseline assessment. I've picked NTU here just because they've done particularly well on their scorecard. So I find it helpful to look at other institutions, particularly within our region in the Midlands, and say we were not doing so well. So I'll pick staff engagement and HR. It's an area where we haven't done so well up to now. NTU are doing really well based on this baseline assessment that I can see. So it could be a prompt for me then to go to NTU and say, oh, would you mind sharing some information on what you're doing in your experiences? And I see it as a bit of a prompt for kind of that peer-to-peer learning, and I like that it's quite transparent in that respect. So finally, and I think the prompt, in a way, for me getting in touch with the EAUC, which culminated in this discussion, in some respect, was my current position in that I've got a baseline, I've engaged with people internally, and I've got that position and the kind of really useful visual to show people. But what now, and how do I progress this further? And I think the fact that currently we're just doing it internally, I need to be really aware and careful that I'm ensuring that it's getting reviewed regularly. So not being like ISO where we've got that annual audit or anything forcing me to look at it. I'm conscious that I don't want it to kind of just fall to the wayside now I've got that baseline, and there is something there that's making me go back to it and keep driving it forwards and improve. So one of the things I'm thinking is potentially an external review process. And another idea I had was potentially aligning it with our environmental management system. So potentially could I align some of our objectives in our EMS and map those against the SLS score and the areas where I've already highlighted where we do need to improve and we've targeted to achieve higher than we are already achieving. So that's our current position. And I'm really interested to hear the experiences of others and what other people are doing with their baseline and how potentially we could take that next step.
Great, thank you very much, Rebecca. We are going to pass straight on to Neal. Neal, if you want to pop your slide up and you can have a chat with us about what you've done.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. Just to say, I'm Neal Smith. I'm the Sustainability Manager at Bournemouth University. I've been here for nearly 4 years, and before that, University of Southampton for about 9.5. So quite a long time in the sector. And I'll just give an overview of where we've got, how we've arrived, where we are with the scorecard. So, casting our minds back, we were involved in the Green Scorecard, which some people may also have completed a couple of years ago now, and we were involved in helping develop that in various workshops. So we did it 2 years ago, and if I'm honest, it didn't really go anywhere. We didn't complete it the following year, but then picked up obviously with a new Sustainability Scorecard. And the first thing to do was to get commitment from senior management that we were going to complete this, because obviously there's lots of competing initiatives, and so we need to make sure that we've got the space and the time to be able to do it. So that was supported through the Sustainability Strategy Group that we have at the university, which is chaired by our Chief Operating Officer. So having got that commitment, the next step was, and this is going to sound very similar to what Rebecca's already been saying, is that very grandiose sounding stakeholder mapping, which is basically just saying who are the key individuals that need to go and speak to about each of the different topic areas, and then planning in meetings with them, providing them with the background and what I want them to do. And those meetings were then mostly in back end of August this year. So the scorecard was pretty much complete by the time I presented it back to the Sustainability Strategy Group, which was at the end of September. Those meetings took between half an hour to 1 hour, depending on the topic and the individual. Those that probably took the longest were those, I would say, where maybe our relationship wasn't as strong as other areas. So the operational areas tended to be quite quick, because we've been doing a lot of work around the usual suspects of transport and energy and carbon. But other areas like education and research, which were kind of new for both myself and for the member of the staff I was talking to, took longer. And we completed the tool while I was there. I think that's really important. So I didn't go away. We actually just filled in and said what the scores were. And what was really key, I think, is that we filled in the narrative box. So that's kind of given us the kind of aide memoire to go when we go back and say, why did we score as we did, to kind of refresh our memories, and also to obviously point at what we were going to do to get us a higher score. What was really important about that is that was put down there, it was a quality structured conversation. So that conversations were really positive. And the fact that we had the scorecard there kind of acted as the structure, rather than, so not sort of going to talk to these people without any kind of agenda or plan for how that conversation was going to go. It was very focused on addressing the questions that were being asked. One thing I would say about that we did struggle a little bit with is around terminology in the scorecard. When we started, we probably I hadn't really given a huge amount of thought as to the way that would come across. In particular, the terminology around policies. So at Bournemouth, we have a new strategy called BU 2025, and that has sustainability built within it. And so really, when we were talking about policies, what we're really talking about was about the strategy. So I think probably what's definitely one of the things to do is just reflect on some of the terminology that's in the scorecard and have a think about how it applies. Now that, of course, means that there will be something that the way that you interpret it will be different potentially between each of the institutions, but that's just what worked for us. And the other thing was that when we were looking at the education question, which is on each of the link to the curriculum on each of the topic areas. We kind of struggled quite a bit with the policy element, and we get the practice bit, that's we can understand that, but the policy part wasn't particularly valuable to us, and that's some feedback that we've given to the EAUC about maybe wanting to change that, because as an institution we're never going to have a policy that talks about the education of our students. It's kind of like, that's why we're here. So that's maybe something that that may change in the future. So that's something that's just a bit of a limitation for the way that we interpreted the terminology. The real benefits of doing the scorecard, it's a gap analysis. So it identifies the areas where we need to focus our efforts. So some areas, like I said, are quite strong in terms of we've been doing them for a long period of time, particularly on the campus operations side. Other areas are relatively new or are not as mature, certainly in terms of education and the research agendas. And the scorecard was reflecting that. So it's quite a strong, robust tool in that respect. And also then, because of the all the different areas it covers, it gives you a really good feel of how you're doing across the board. That sort of wide view of where we are as an institution. The visualization tool is really, really good. That went down very well with the committee, so it's quite clear where you've got to and where the targets are pushing you. And so, as I said, I took that back to our committee in September, and it was also then reported on to our university leadership team, which is the next group up, if you like. So they're aware of what we've been up to as well. Really then, in terms of next steps, just to kind of reiterate something that Rebecca said, is that at the moment it's kind of a standalone tool. It sort of sits on its own, which isn't, I don't think, a particularly healthy place for it to be, and really needs to be integrated into our environmental management system. And ideally what we should have done, hindsight, wonderful thing, should have taken where we had the narrative to improve, those should have been folded into our objectives register, and then we could have tracked progress with them through that process and through audit, which would have been a better way to go, certainly for ourselves. So far, I have to say the SDG map has been of limited value, and one of the reasons for that is kind of struggled to see the link between the scorecard scores and the actual mapping against the SDGs. So when I understand that a bit better, I think that will give us all confidence in what the map is actually telling us. That's one thing that I have also fed back to the EAUC about. But one, of course, positive spin out is that through the Times Hire, we were able to use that SDG map as part of our evidence. So, of course, that was an unexpected benefit. We didn't see that coming at the start. So at the moment, the idea is that we will go back to the scorecard next summer and then reevaluate as to where we've got to. One of the things, again, that we kind of struggled a little bit with is that actually, and it may be a different situation now, is that relatively few institutions have actually completed the scorecard, and certainly none down here on the South Coast. So that when we met as a South Coast group, and I gave a presentation, none of my colleagues have actually completed it, which is a bit frustrating when, in terms of being able to benchmark ourselves. That's just the situation. Hopefully that will improve. So the other thing to say is that the benchmarking agenda at the moment is quite busy. We have a lot going on. So we have our own environmental management system, and we've just been externally audited against that. We have the estates management return, and we're just obviously in the throes of completing that. We have the University League still going on in the background, and also in the foreground at the moment with the websites being looked at. And now we've also got the Times Hire coming into the picture with the SDG So it's at the moment it's getting quite crowded, and we'll have to take a bit of a view as an institution as to the relative value of each of these, because like everybody else, we've got the day job to do as well as these various reporting tools, and we'll have to assess as to which one or which ones we feel give us the greatest value for the amount of effort that we're putting in. Anyway, so that's the situation at Bournemouth, and obviously welcome to any questions you've got about the way we tackled it and what we've got out of the system so far. Thank you.
Great, so thank you very much, Neal. So Neal's a Sustainability Manager at Bournemouth University. Just would like to say at this point that we also have Jane White, who's the Executive Director at Board, on the webinar, as well as Ian Patton, who is our CEO at EAUC. So hopefully if we have questions that they can help us answer some of those. If anyone does have any questions, I'm more than happy for us to take those now. If you don't have a microphone, although I believe most of you do, if you could unmute yourself before you ask the question and introduce yourself. If not, feel free to use the chat box, which I think you can find at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. While we're waiting for any questions, just a quick one for Rebecca and Neal. Just generally, did you find the scorecard quite easy to complete? Was it quite straightforward, Rebecca?
Technically, yes. I found the platform really straightforward and quite intuitive to use. I think, as Neal mentioned, the difficulty I had was around perhaps some of the wording and how you interpret different elements of the questions, and you couldn't progress much further without having kind of a policy in the public domain. And like Neal said, we wouldn't necessarily have a policy on education, for example, or teaching. So a few elements where we struggled to get past the first stage, and perhaps could have, I'm not sure, I think it was around the wording of the question more than anything. But otherwise, the platform as a whole was really quite straightforward, and I found the ability to put the narrative in really helpful as well.
Neal, would you concur with that?
Yes, yeah, very much. The platform was very easy to use. Although one thing to say, of course, is that you need to use Chrome to get the full functionality. So that's just a heads up. Other explorers are available, but they don't seem to quite work as well. So just one thing that we found, and I think that's known about anyway. So just if people are thinking of using it, that's something to consider. But yeah, just to reiterate what Rebecca said, the actual once you did that, to navigate around the scorecard and to complete it was very straightforward. And also making sure that things were saved as well, so that that's kind of crucial. So you don't want to lose all that good work. So yeah, I'd say it's quite intuitive. And back to the point that we both now expressed is that need a little bit of interpretation for your institution about how you're going to for the particular terminology around policies and the like. But I'm sure that will now become easier as we move on, and that's certainly one thing that I expect that next time we do it, the amount of time involved will diminish because people are now familiar with the tool, and we've had those conversations about, well, what do we actually really refer to? And the other thing that I think was also took a little bit of time was when I was talking to colleagues, they were thinking about their day job. They weren't specifically thinking about sustainability. They were thinking about things like training for the institution on that scale. So we had to kind of always draw back and just think about actually what does that mean for sustainability. So there was a little bit of toing and froing in terms of conversations around that.
Great, thank you. Joe Shields at Loughborough has just asked a question to everybody, and I guess that feeds back into what Neal and Rebecca were just saying, and it's about benchmarking and the number of institutions that have completed the scorecard. So Joe's saying she's also having problems with the number of people who've benchmarked, to benchmark against. What are we doing to get more institutions on board? Certainly there is a one-on-one push for this to be used by all our member organisations. I don't know, Ian, if you've got any more on that.
I think we're doing things like this webinar. And I think we're all too busy, so connecting what we're all doing. So the whole notion of the scorecard was to actually be a composite of all of the standards, all of the awards that we've already got, so that we're not reinventing the wheel. So you create one picture, and you don't have to redo lots of bits. You've already got them integrated, and the EMR is the core part of that. But then, as soon as we talk to the Times and this whole new ranking pops up, we're going, right, we need to have an early day conversation with them to ensure that what we're doing connects with that. So, that's very much our lifeblood is here. How do we integrate all that we do into a much more efficient and effective process? So, spreading the word like we're doing today. While I'm on, can I ask a quick question? I'll take that as a yes. Rebecca, you talked about you're the one taking the scorecard out, and you're going and using it to have structured conversations with your colleagues in other departments. Do you see that as, you have to do that because you're the one sort of pushing and leading this, or is it about a control that you can have, having the definitive picture, or do you see in time responsibility for other parts of the scorecard being handed out, delegated by your colleagues across the university?
Yeah, I think that's the situation now, because other people across the university aren't aware of this as a tool. So I think my role in going out and introducing them to it and trying to almost sell it in a way was needed at the beginning, and obviously pick their brains for the expertise. But I think ideally I would like to give them access to the scorecard, and for them to be able to lock in and update and kind of celebrate if they've moved things along a bit since the last time I spoke to them. But I think we're a little way off having that level of engagement personally here at Lincoln, because kind of sustainability is possibly in a little bit of an earlier stage, where it's some areas it's not fully embedded. So I think for now it'll need me to go out and continue to drive it, and to put in those fairly regular meetings with them, and kind of make sure it's annually reviewed. But yeah, in the future, ideally, it would be the responsibility of those key leads to drive the progress, and come back and report on it.
Have we got any more questions from anyone? It'd be nice to get a feel of how many of the institutions represented here actually have completed the scorecard, or any questions just in terms of the technicalities of filling it in. I know you said that it was easy to fill in. I wondered if you had any notes on things like any technical difficulties you might have had, any more details that you felt like there just should have been a bit more detail in terms of how you completed it.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, just echo what Neal said. I was using Explorer, and it took quite a long time to realise that actually it doesn't like that, and Chrome is the favoured platform. So yeah, I think probably making that a bit more widely known, because you feel like you're losing data, so it can create frustration. And obviously, if people are busy, you don't want that. You want them to get onto the index and be able to use it. And I think also I agree about some of the terminology. I think it's quite important. We are there as the sustainability link when we're initially filling it in. Certain colleagues don't necessarily understand what the index is asking of them with respect to their area. So that dialogue and conversation, I think, has been really useful, but also it's quite important that you're able to have that conversation with key colleagues about what sustainability actually looks like in their area. I think the curriculum question is tricky. With the policy, we're the same. Realistically, how many of those areas are going to have a dedicated policy for curriculum? So that might benefit for some tweaking at some point. And then I had a question, actually, possibly Ian may be able to answer this, which was, have you got a sense of how much filling in the scorecard contributes to goal 17 of the SDGs in terms of the index? the Times Higher Index. So knowing you have to complete a minimum of 4, does completing the SLS effectively give you enough data in that for 1? Do you actually know that?
I think it's early days, Joe, on that front, and I think the Times focusing on 4 is really only them dipping their toe in the water. So in the end of the day, stick with it, because you're doing the bigger picture will reap dividends. So I think they're just feeling their way and they're not clear yet. So I don't think we can answer that question. Sorry.
We've had a comment from Tamara from Chester. She says, we've started the process of completing the scorecard and are planning to start work on redrafting our sustainability strategy beyond 2020, and plan to use the scorecard to contribute to that process and work with key colleagues to take their areas on and build an annual review in line with the annual reporting. So a bit of crossover in terms of reporting there. Katie at Sheffield Hallam just wanted to touch on what Joe has just said. She feels the scorecard puts a lot of focus on published policies, which we may or may not have for each specific area. However, we do fulfill other elements of the criteria. I'm finding that we can't score points on the basis we don't have a formalized policy despite our efforts. Is this open to interpretation, or are we limited by not having these policies formally in place?
I'll take that one. In the end of the day, we're all on the journey. But of course, having a clear strategy policy in the public domain is clearly the top position. So, in the end of the day, that is what we're working towards. It's not always a linear journey, but I think we would all see that, and people on the planet would agree, I'm sure, that having something in the public domain that nails our colours to the mast and says this is what we believe, this is what we do, is clearly what we need to be heading for. So don't beat yourself up. It's a process. You've got to bring people with you, but that is clearly where we would want to be going. Claire, can I ask a quick question? Again, to anyone, but particularly Neal and Rebecca. I was talking to David Suchfield at St Andrews, and they're using the graphics to engage and report to senior management. Can I ask you for your experience of that? Are the graphics and those sort of auto reports fit for purpose? This is a learning journey we're all on. How can we improve them? Are they working?
Yeah, Ian, I'll just say that the graphics were very helpful in terms of the visualization, and they worked well in terms of reporting up to management. So yeah, and it gave a good picture of where we are. The only slight technical hitch, which you may or may not be aware of, is that unfortunately one of the items doesn't quite map accordingly, and Fiona's on the case without in terms of getting that updated. So it's just something to be aware of. It's nothing major, but it doesn't quite map directly across from what's from the actual when you create the PDF file. Basically, there's a bit of a glitch. But in terms of actually visualizing how we're doing, and yes, it was really good. As I said, the SDG mapping one, less so, I would say, and that's because I think possibly because it's early days, but also because it wasn't clear, as I said, in terms of how the scores that we provided linked into the terminology used around the SDG. So whether it was significant or whether it was, opportunity for improvement and that kind of thing. So I think there's maybe a wee bit more work there required to kind of make that a bit more mainstream, and also, as I said, to understand more clearly how we fill in the scores relates to how that will impact on the SDGs, and I think that would be helpful.
Before Rebecca comes in, thanks, Neal. I think you're right. It's very early days on mapping against the SDGs, and what you've got is quite a high level approach. But what you do have is the scope to completely reinvent the alignment of what you're doing through the scorecard against the SDGs. So you do have scope to go, do you know what? The default setting doesn't really work for us. actually what we're doing in this department or in this bit of our university actually has this, and this impact on this, and this SDG. So you've got the potential there to really make this your own. And I think really that has to be where you take this, but that is a longer, slower journey. But, you know, if you want a quick and dirty thing, you can do in a few weeks, a quick benchmark, and you will get very high level where you are in all the SDGs. And that's quite useful just as a starting point to engage. And as I say, then you can use that for the ranking. And just quickly on the Chrome thing, yeah, Jane will be on this call from Aud as alongside I going. That wasn't the plan. So that was something to do with Arab, of which we've had many conversations about Chrome being the preferred option. So I apologise for that. But yeah, we need to get that word out wider. Sorry, Rebecca, do you want to just talk a little bit about your experience of presenting this to executives?
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't have much more to add other than what Neal said, because I think I echo his thoughts pretty much entirely. I think the visualization element was particularly useful and something that has been a differentiation between other scorecards and ranking methods that we've looked at. I think it went down really well with like leadership teams, just being able to flash that image up and then to be able to talk around it and really visually look at which areas we're strong at and which areas, well, we've got more of a long way to go. So for us, that was a really kind of strong element of the tool.
I've had a comment also from Kate Cathy from Chichester. They filled in the green scorecard and used it to put together their sustainability plan for 2017 to 2022. They struggled a bit while gauging which level we were at, which I feel might be the same for the SLS. I think we touched on this slightly, but I wondered if Neal or Rebecca had any more to kind of say on that, or anyone really.
Okay, I'm happy to say something. I think just reiterating a little bit what I said earlier, which is I think, as I said, we've already touched on around the word policy, and that we defaulted to our strategy as being synonymous with that word. So that's the way we took it, because some of the elements mapped logically against the strategy that we'd already put in place, and that seems to me to be right for our institution. So I think you need to have a think about what your institution strategy looks like, and then replay it and then play them off against that, particularly when you're looking at maybe some of the areas that aren't your kind of traditional area that you might focus on. And what I mean by that is that campus operations tends to be the area that people focus on, maybe not so much on the other elements from the point of view of sustainability. So that's what we found, and that seemed to work quite well. So yeah, my advice is just have a look and see what's already in your strategy at the university. And it's the other, of course, positive side of that is that if it's not there, then this is a good tool for you to push your way in, if you like, and get sustainability up the agenda and into the next iteration of your university strategy.
Rebecca, any comments on that?
I think, to be honest, we're in a fairly similar position at the moment. The scorecard is a little bit of a standalone thing, and really the main benefit is kind of the engagement element and getting it up onto the agenda of senior leadership team. We're now at that stage of working out how to integrate it into the strategy and the EMS. So I think we're facing similar challenges. So we haven't quite worked out how best we can integrate it. So it's going to be something I'm looking at over the next few weeks.
I wondered if anyone has had any experience on communicating this to senior leaders. If anyone has anything to say on that, or how it's been useful perhaps, or not useful. No, Ian, do you want to just finish off with any comments? I think we're kind of out of questions at the moment. We'll be running some similar seminars or webinars when we've had a few more people completing. So hopefully in the new year we can schedule another one and get some updates on some other institutions that have completed the scorecard and get some more information from that.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Neal and Rebecca, for that. I found your presentations really, really clear and useful and actually very hopeful. So, you know, these are challenging times. I seem to be saying that for many years, but these really are. And the craziness that's going on around us with you know what, that word, and great insecurity and lack, reduced confidence in the sector. So it's time to really pull off the gloves and find new ways of showing why, when cuts are required, that this is not the obvious area to hit first. Actually, this has business value. So we've got to find better ways of showing the value of what we do, and showing the relevance that sometimes, if you're in the States, for example, you bring to the core of what the university is about, the student experience or quality of teaching or whatever. So I think a whole institution approach, as the scorecard does, is actually needed more now than ever. And then, yes, we're all overworked with all sorts of benchmarks and standards and tools, and we just said, look, people are spending far too much time measuring, monitoring, reporting, and not actually doing. So we need to make sense of all of the things that we're being pushed down the road to measure, monitor, and report, and pull them into one tool, which is hopefully much more efficient, clearly needs to be much more effective. So this is a learning process. The tool isn't a year old. It's a really powerful collaboration between AUDE and EAUC, and there'll be other sector agencies that come into this as they start to realise that this is business relevance, be you in finance, procurement, or clearly teaching, research, or leadership. So we need to hear your voices. We've heard lots of comments today. Really good to hear comments and insights from people like Joe, Neil, Rebecca. We need to hear those voices more. We need to improve this tool. Aud and EAUC are committed. That's why we're really having a loud voice with HISA and the potential changes, brackets loss of the EMR. That's not something we want, but even if that does happen, I'm not saying it will, but even if it does, the sector values this. So we need to find new ways to ensure that we can benchmark. We need more people using the tool. Please spread the word. But in the end of the day, it's only going to be used if it's of value. So webinars hosted by Claire like this are critical to us understanding the value, understanding tricks from each other, and making this thing work. So we're all in this together. So thank you for your time. I'll let Claire wrap up, but there will be new iterations of this scorecard. All the AUC are committed to that. So have your voice.
Great, thank you, Ian. Obviously, this is an ongoing conversation, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to email us. We will, especially with technical issues, but any ways that you think that this tool can be improved, we're really keen to make sure that it's useful to all of you and that you can all use it within your institutions.